So now that we've reframed the gravitational force in terms of an interaction between point particles, we want to come back and rethink the gravitational potential energy due to an interaction between point particles. And so this is going to build off our definition for work. The work is defined to be some integral from some initial position to a final position of a force dotted in with our infinitesimal little displacements. And then we know that the definition of potential energy tells us that the change in the potential energy is equal to negative the work done by a conservative force. So I can think about the change in the gravitational potential energy as being equal to negative, there's the negative sign, and then the work just becomes my integral. So the integral from some initial to final position of the gravitational force dotted in with dr. And so before we worry about doing that calculation, let's think conceptually about how we can determine whether or not the gravitational potential energy is increasing or decreasing. We've already talked about the gravitational potential energy in a constant field. And so we said that under those conditions, the change in the gravitational potential energy is equal to plus or minus mg delta h. And so of course the plus or minus here was going to tell us whether or not our gravitational potential energy was increasing or decreasing, increasing with a plus, decreasing with a minus, because mg and delta h in this equation were all positive quantities. So the answer to this question, when dealing with a constant gravitational field, was is the object moving up or down? We said if you take some object and let it move up or down, that the gravitational potential energy is going to increase if the object moves up, and it will decrease if the object moves down. But of course the gravitational force points down. So we can reframe the way we're thinking about whether or not the gravitational potential energy is increasing or decreasing to say that the gravitational potential energy increases if your object moves against the gravitational force. When it moved up, if the force pointed down, it was moving against the gravitational force, and the gravitational potential energy increased. On the other hand, if your object moved down, then it was moving with the gravitational force, and so the gravitational potential energy decreases if our object moves with the gravitational force. But of course this framing, in terms of an object moving up or down, which worked really well in our constant field, isn't going to work as well when we have a gravitational force due to point particles. And so we probably want to rethink that fundamental question of is the object moving up or down, and instead phrase it as is the object moving with or against the gravitational force? Because one of the things that hopefully you've taken away from the class at this point is when the question arises, how can we determine whether any potential energy is increasing or decreasing? The answer to that is, well, is the object moving with or against some conservative force? If it's moving against the conservative force, then the potential energy will increase. If it's moving with the conservative force, then the potential energy will decrease. What we can conclude from that then is that the change in the gravitational potential energy of a mass as it moves in the presence of other masses, because that's due to a conservative force, that has to indicate whether or not your mass is moving with or against the net gravitational force acting on it. So in situations where the gravitational potential energy increases, it increases because you are moving against the gravitational, which means the work done by the gravitational force is negative. The negative work term cancels that negative sign sitting out in front, and this occurs because you or some other external agent has done positive work to increase the gravitational potential energy. On the other hand, when you let your system go and give the gravitational force the opportunity to do positive work, that positive work term multiplied by that negative sign is going to tell you that it's always going to act to decrease the gravitational potential energy.